Hello and welcome to the Metropolitan Elites. I'm David Swansbuckle.
I'm Warren Spector.
And the left-wing Illuminati have rung us up this time to talk about the BBC. What we thought we'd do would be interesting is to do a proper investigation into the perceived bias of the BBC. Are the BBC biased? And be completely impartial about it. We're completely impartial, aren't we? Obviously we're not, we are biased. But we're going to try and look at it
from a neutral perspective
as best we can, because nobody does. Maybe we can succeed where others haven't. I mean, there is a website, Biased BBC, biasedbbc.org. I couldn't find anything on the evidence of right-wing stuff that we've already found just from watching it. So it is biased, unfortunately. Biased BBC website is biased. It's still useful, obviously. There's loads of good information on there. So yeah, well, this is what we're going to do over the next few weeks, I think, isn't it? We're going to examine some different things. What did you do when you started reading stuff? What was your approach?
Well, I tried to look for something that had been levelled at the BBC for bias that I might have a bit of sympathy with, because I do have a tendency to sort of tune out the BBC bias argument out, because the BBC has an incredibly difficult job actually, because we live in a world where the market is saturated by biased media.
Yeah.
One way or the other.
Yeah, one way or the other.
Mostly one way.
Yeah.
And the BBC theoretically should be impartial. That's one of its rules. How do you be, which is great in theory, but in reality, how do you remain impartial when you're covering the news?
Yeah.
It's incredibly difficult.
I mean, the idea, really, I think that often what's levied at it is that, that impartiality means never say anything about anything.
Yeah.
Which would be rubbish and impossible anyway.
Yeah.
Up to this point, from just watching the BBC and not really thinking about it too much, is that there are things on it which are left wing, there are things on it which are right wing, whatever that means.
I did manage to find an issue which I do have a little bit of sympathy for, which I do have a bit of an agreement about from watching the BBC, and that was the Scottish referendum. Now, I was quite pro-union. I was desperate for the Scots not to leave. I feel they're a sort of a counterbalance to some right-wing tendencies in this country.
The home counties.
Yeah. So I was desperate for Scotland not to leave, but there was a big a complaint that the BBC were institutionally biased towards the union argument. And it was presented, it was obviously the Yes campaign thought this was obvious and screamingly obvious, and that, but there is a tendency to, once you spot something, to sort of amplify it, confirmation bias. So once you see something as biased, you have your own bias which picks out all the instances that you think are biased. And you go through YouTube and there's quite a few people on there that have highlighted clips which were clearly biased towards the Yes campaign, and when you actually look at it, you've got to ask yourself the question: the Yes campaign was trying to argue for change, so therefore it was more controversial.
Yeah.
Therefore it was going to generate more questions.
Yeah.
So the complaint is, well, you never question the no campaigns. You never sort of question their what they're saying, but you always, whenever someone comes on the Yes, you're always giving them a bit of a grilling. I think a lot of that was simply down to the fact that the Yes campaign were arguing for change, and they had to make that case, and therefore that would elicit questions. It's very hard to come up with any meaningful questions that wouldn't be really boring for the status quo. Yeah. How do you argue for the status quo? Well, the status quo is the status quo. You were basically saying, why should you change? But I did find, some evidence that there was a more subtle sort of bias in the BBC on this front, in the sense that the sort of sources they used, sort of focusing of policies on the single person, i.e. Alex Salmond, and the sort of the negativity. So everything was presented with the negativity. So it was all like, the EU won't allow Scotland into the bad news for the Union. The EU wouldn't allow Scotland in, and the news would always open with that. And then you get into it, and then there'll be a slight counter argument, but it would always come second. And obviously, the second point always, has less impact. People watch headlines. People got a very short attention span. So whatever's in the headline tends to grab the attention, has more impact. So on that front, I think there was actually a bit of bias in the BBC.
Yeah, that was my impression.
Independence.
From a very, very passive perspective, that was my impression as well.
Yeah. There's actually a guy. He basically he took a year and he recorded all the news from the BBC and ITV over that period, and then sort of took out the stuff relating to the independence, the referendum, and he found that there was a bias there, that it wasn't so pronounced, but there was a definite bias there, and he wrote a paper, and there is a paper out there which you can read, which is is produced by an academic, a respected academic. It was put to the BBC, and the BBC dismissed it out of hand and started threatening him with basically undermining his credentials as an academic. So they got his university involved and things like that. And his job was to scrutinise the media, and
that's what he was doing.
And that's what he was doing.
Yeah, just the same as any other media organisation. That's what they do, isn't it? They defend themselves. That when the spotlight is put on them, it's suddenly they're victims.
The BBC get an awful lot of stick from all quarters, and it must be a whole department's full-time job just batting off the lunatics who seem to think the BBC must report everything the way they want it reported, or presented the way they want it presented, and saying that they've got a complaint because it's not exactly how they want it to be. Yeah. So the BBC got a tough job. So yeah, we picked up both bias, but the interesting thing is it runs counter to the Conservative narrative that the BBC is biased against the Conservative, because obviously the Conservative were a big proponent of the Union, and the statistics that they were using, the BBC used, basically derived from the OBR. So they would present Institute for Fiscal Studies as an unbiased commentator, and actually the Institute for Fiscal Studies gets its statistics from the Office of Budget Responsibility. We got a lot of its figures from the OBR, and the OBR predictions, which was instituted by Osborne, supposedly independent, but actually run as if it's part of the Conservative Party. So it basically issues Conservative
doctrine.
And actually, I would imagine it's actually an arm of the government, and if Labour were in power, I'm sure it would become a wing of the Labour Party, effectively. But the idea that the BBC is anti-Tory is not quite borne out by this.
No, it is not. But that's the thing, and it does seem, whoever you are, the BBC are anti-us. My approach to it was, I thought, well, first thing to do is find some quotes. That's nice and straightforward. If you're writing a thesis, you read some pieces and you grab some quotes out of it. If maybe you're doing your dissertation overnight, you grab some quotes, don't you? So I thought that's a good way to start. And what I found I did was I found one thing, and then my gut instinct was, well, I've got to find something that counters that. And it's very easy. Whatever you find that someone's saying, you can find the opposite. You've got the British Humanist Association. They did a big thing. They did a big paper on bias at the BBC against humanists. The BBC's blinkered bias against non-religious beliefs show in many ways, not least their absence from the title of its Religion and Ethics Department, suggesting that ethics are inevitably linked to religion. Well, that is factually true, isn't it, actually, what they're saying? But then, there was a Radio 4 presenter said, liberal, sceptical humanists tend to dominate television. That's from someone in the BBC, and that's the thing. There's a lot of criticism internally. Now, either, that internal criticism is there because there's something big to criticise, or there's lots of right-wing people working at the BBC. I don't know. Andrew Marr said, a publicly funded urban organisation with an abnormally large proportion of younger people, of people in ethnic minorities, and almost certainly of gay people compared with the population at large. And that creates an innate liberal bias in the BBC. Lenny Henry said, well, his first writers' meeting, when he got to work at the BBC, very few female, 0 other black minorities. So he was the only black man out of 200 people. That's what he said in the 80s, and now he said, the diversity in the BBC infrastructure needs to be addressed. So he doesn't agree with that diversity. Now, it could be he's talking about the hierarchy, not what you see on the screen. I think you see relative diversity on the screen. Whether I think that from my own perspective or not is the question, isn't it? Yeah. Who do you agree with, Andrew Marr or Lenny Henry? That's the question. Do you think Lenny Henry should go back to the black country or a black country? I think Andrew Marr gets accused of being left wing. I don't think he is. So that's another problem, isn't it? I mean, aren't all these presenters right wing? We think they are, but is that because we're left wing?
I can't see how you categorise Andrew Marr as left wing.
No, I probably, or maybe it's just, you know, well, he asked David Cameron a difficult question once.
Yeah, I mean
former business editor at the BBC, Jeff Randall, never heard of him, he said it was like working at the Flat Earth Society, in that if he said the Earth is round, they'd think you're an extremist. That's what it's like for someone with my right of centre views working inside the BBC. But he's giving something away there, isn't he? In that he's saying his views are scientifically correct, like the Earth is round. Hang on, what? You know, I wonder what it was that he said that made people think he was extreme. Peter Sissons, a respected presenter, you know, he said, by far the most popular, widely read newspapers at the BBC are The Guardian and The Independent. Now, there was a Freedom of Information request for 2014. Turned out that it bought more copies of the Daily Mail than anything else, followed by the Times, followed by the Telegraph, followed by the Sun, then the Independent, then the Mirror, then the Guardian. So that's really strange, isn't it? In that the Guardian is the stereotype, and it's actually last on the list.
That is interesting. It just shows how people's. It's sort of this idea of this confirmation bias. Once you zero in on something, you only see. So Peter Sissons is walking around and he only ever sees the papers, he only ever sees the Guardian.
He sees the Guardian.
There's another Guardian,
Yeah.
There's an Independent.
10 Daily Mails around, yeah. Right. Yeah. But I mean, that was the Freedom of Information request. Now, you may believe that the BBC faked their Freedom of Information request, but it would be very difficult for them to do that. And bear in mind there's people who are right-wing working there who wouldn't agree with that. Yeah. So, yeah, but biasbbc.org is worth a read, though. Just talking now, we've already showed our bias, I think. We've failed to be impartial already.
But I think the fact that we wear our bias on our sleeves and we tell you exactly where we're coming from.
Yeah, I mean,
that deserves a little bit of credibility, because quite often in reporting on the BBC and ITV, you know, they will present someone as from a think tank, as if they're some kind of independent person. I mean, how often do you see someone from the Taxpayers Alliance on Question Time? These are a right-wing lobby group.
Yeah,
you know, they are biased to the core. Like, they have an agenda, and yet they are presented as dropped in, looking at this all objectively and giving their impartial advice.
Yeah, and they're massively biased. But yeah, well, we've got to make this next few weeks is that we're going to try and put across different viewpoints, and we did just do that. I did just do that. So, you know, and biasbbc.org, which is really good, doesn't at all. It focuses 100% on left-wing bias. Picture of Harriet Harman with the whole of the Newsnight team on the pink bus, which should be embarrassing in itself for the Newsnight team, regardless of their left or right. You know, there's good stuff on biasbbc.org. I mean, lots of tweets from, you know, people like Richard Bacon supporting Obama, disparaging to Sarah Palin. Isn't everybody disparaging to Sarah Palin? Yeah. I mean, a lot of support for Obama from lots of people. But I mean, surely, I've always thought, you know, mainstream Tories, normal Tories, proper Tories, not nutters, are much like the Democrats in America, aren't they? That's the way I see it. And then the Republicans are a further extreme group.
Something like the One Nation Tories are like that.
Yeah.
I don't know. There seems to be a fairly quiet group within the Conservative Party at the moment. Whether it's like the recent intake and the last intake, they all seem to be much further to the right than traditional Tories. Yes,
that just seems to be what's happening, which is weird. The period of David Cameron's crap, his made up nonsense about him being centrist and all that, has passed. Yeah. Has been dropped. They've dropped their green housing allowance thing. That was in the news recently, wasn't it? You know, all those things like that have all recently happened. Now they're actually in power. Actually, they can do them. So yeah, questions we should answer over the next few weeks. You know, is the impartiality ethos, is that basically code for left-wing, you know, protecting people from the establishment? Is impartiality code for actually right-wing being part of the establishment? Is lefty part of the establishment? Is right part of the establishment? Surely conservatism by its nature is preventing change, isn't it? So surely if you're conservative, you you're protecting the establishment, I think, maybe. The other question is the BBC quite the same as it was, say, 40 years ago? Was it actually kind of socialist 40 years ago and not now? That could be the case. I could believe that. But is it? I don't know.
I actually think, you think maybe it's social. I actually think the BBC is conservative, small c, in the sense that it's very resistant to change, has a very traditional sense of proprietary, so it's very pro monarchy.
Establishment.
I mean, you know, there's a royal baby or whatever. The BBC goes absolutely mental.
Yeah.
They're very keen on supporting the government of the day, whether that's a Conservative government or a Labour government or a coalition government. So I don't think you'll find. Well, my personal view is I don't think they were particularly socialist last time round. In 40 years ago, I don't think they're that right wing at the moment. I just think they're conservative in the sense that
Their establishment.
They are supporting the establishment.
Yeah.
And are part of the establishment.
Yeah, we'll find out. That's what we've got to investigate. That's what we're going to look at.
Yeah.
The other question is, who controls the BBC? Who are the directors, etc., etc. Which is, yeah.
It'd be interesting actually to see who actually is in power in the BBC and who has the most influence.
The other question is, what do moderate people think? Where did they get that information from? That's what I'd really like to know. It's very difficult to get that information from someone moderate. What's the BBC like? They'll say, well, Doctor Who, and it's good. But you can get that information. That's crucial information, and where they got the information from. Yeah, so that's what we're going to be talking about the next few weeks, I think.
Yeah.
So yes, we'll be back next week. The left-wing lizard overlords will ring us up and tell us what to say about the BBC, to lie about the BBC. We'll see you then.